Welcome to the Smart Business Revolution.
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 You want a revolution?
You say you want a revolution?
Revolution. The revolution.
It's going on right now.
Welcome to The Revolution, the Smart Business Revolution podcast, where we ask today's most successful entrepreneurs to share the tools and strategies they use to build relationships and connections to grow their revenue. Now, your host for The Revolution, John Corcoran.
All right, welcome everyone. John Corcoran here, the host of this show. Every week I get to talk to interesting folks, CEOs, founders, entrepreneurs of all kinds of different companies, including recently the original CEO and co-founder of Netflix. We've talked with executives from YPO, EO, Activation, Blizzard, LendingTree, OpenTable. Go check out my archives because there's lots of great episodes there. And you know my story. I'm a recovering political hack, recovering lawyer, spent years in politics, including working as a speechwriter with stints in the Clinton White House and for a California governor, and also was privileged to practice law for many years in Silicon Valley and see some amazing up and coming companies. But my guest in this episode will talk about some really interesting companies that he's been involved in through various different roles. John Greathouse has held a number of senior executive positions with successful startups, spearheading transactions generating more than $350 million in shareholder value, including an IPO and a $100 million acquisition. He's also a venture capitalist, deployed roughly $100 million into approximately 60 different ventures. He's written for Forbes since 2008, as well as the Wall Street Journal, Business Insider, Entrepreneur, and TechCrunch. He's a CPA and holds an MBA from the Wharton School. And since 2007, he has been professor at the University of California, Santa Barbara, where he teaches entrepreneurship, my alma mater. And this is part of my series focusing on UC Santa Barbara entrepreneurs. So I'm really excited to have John here as part of that. Of course, this is brought to you by Rise 25 Media, where we help B2B businesses to get clients, referrals, and strategic partnerships with done-for-you podcasts and content marketing. If you have any questions about that, give us a call or send us an email at support@rise25media.com. All right, Professor Greathouse, such a pleasure to have you here. I followed you for a while, followed your writing, followed your video. You're big into creating content. And so I've been able to follow you from a while for a while, even though we didn't know each other when I was at UC Santa Barbara. And I want to jump in first. You've worn all these different hats, but one of your early victories was you were involved in a little, we'll call it, these days you'd probably call it a precursor to Zoom. A company that laid the groundwork for Zoom, which you all know now, but GoToMeeting, which is a little $700 million business acquired by Citrix. And you were one of their first business guys. So tell me a little bit about what it was like joining this company that was doing, what would you describe it at the time? Online teleconferences or something like that?
No, and it wasn't even, I'll try to do it quickly because it had a little twisty turny story. That was a wonderful bio. You forgot to mention I'm the only CPA that probably can't balance his checkbook. I literally took that exam and that was the last I saw of accounting. But it's still in my bio after all these years. So be careful if you guys get your CPA, it never goes away. You called me professor at the beginning, which is very kind of you. I self-identify as an entrepreneur, right? I was the kid selling popcorn in the front yard, embarrassing my parents and thought nothing of it. So I was always kind of scheming and just having fun and I built a little sports memorabilia company when I was in my teens and just stuff like that. Couldn't stop, right? The story with Expert City is interesting. So the company's name was Expert City. We had this little 128 kilobyte applet that moved pixels and mouse clicks safely and securely over the internet. And so the first application that we thought, this is 1999, so I'm dating myself. So it was at the cusp of the internet, before the bust, before the dot bomb, and we decided we would take our really cool technology and allow people from all over the world to fix technical problems, right? So John Corcoran has a printer driver problem in Australia. I see it. I log on and I go, hey, John, I can fix your problem for $5. And you're like, take control of my computer and go to town. So it was an early screen sharing application back when that was hard. Like everybody was on dial up, and even if you had like a really crappy firewall from Radio Shack, like it would block stuff. And so you had to be able to get through firewalls and make it easy, right? So now so fast forward a year, the dot bomb happens. It's March of 2000 and 2001, and everybody's just like running for the hills, and companies aren't getting funded. We had raised $30 million, and that was something that I, with my sort of faux finance skills and my faux Wharton MBA, but my sales skills enabled us to raise a lot of money before the crash, and we didn't spend it, unlike most companies. So we came out into the nuclear winter with about $22 million in cash, and we're able to, gave us time to dump that expert city business model, which was a joke, and just look at what we had, which was this really crazy, powerful tool that allowed you to take control of somebody's computer. So I just started selling it to ISPs. So I sold it to Cox Communications, I ended up hitting all of them. And then when I kind of had gone through all of those,
so they could use it internally though as a business tool. They would
call center.
Their call center, their IT people would got it. Okay.
Yeah, because they would blow their mind. So think about it. Yeah. You're calling in. I ended up selling to Microsoft and Oracle and Adobe. So my first wave was selling it to ISPs because their hair was on fire because they couldn't get people online.
Oh, then trying to diagnose things, talking it over the phone or something. Yeah, exactly.
Think about it. In 2000, you say, okay, go down to your system tray, and people are like, "What?
Where's my system tray?" Right?
I don't understand you. So it was like, hey, let me just do it. And then the next wave was all these big software companies, and then we were actually doing pretty well. So we created a product that some of your listeners will have heard of. It was called Go to My PC. So it allowed you to work from home remotely. This is back when that was new.
I remember it, yeah.
And people would either have a VPN or they'd have to go into their office. And so we said, you don't need either. Just download this little tool for $19. We sold a shit ton of that software. We crushed it. So then the third product we came out with. So the first one was a support product called GoToAssist. Then we did GoToMyPC. Then we did GoToMeeting. And what we did with GoToMeeting is we made WebEx simple. So WebEx was already out there, but you needed a PhD to work that. I mean, it was like you literally needed a tech person sitting off screen so that he or she could jump in and fix something. And our tool was easy. So GoToMeeting, it was a hit from the beginning. Citrix came knocking on our door. We weren't for sale. We ended up negotiating with them. I did that deal with Mark Templeton, the CEO at the time, and they ended up doing really well with that investment. So we were all happy with it. It's about $240 million after the earn out and everything. But we were all, I think, pretty pleased. And that was in a 2004 dollars. So now make it, you have to put a little bit of inflation on top of that for today.
Right. But that was also a time when, so you were in Santa Barbara, right?
Yeah.
And Santa Barbara, for those who don't know it, first of all, beautiful town. I love it. I miss it. Such a great town to live in, but not close to Silicon Valley, on the same coast, but a distance away. And at the time, didn't have a whole heck of a lot of tech companies, right? So what was it like did that benefit you? Was that a detriment? What was it like developing a tech company in Santa Barbara at that time?
This was the second one that I developed. We skipped over it, which is fine. I helped I was the first business person at a company called Computer Motion, which we helped create the medical robotics industry. So we went public in 97. We raised a bunch of money. We ended up merging with Intuitive Surgical, which is the leader in that space. They're like an $80 billion plus market cap company. So that was also another transaction that worked out pretty well. But to your point, the reason I thought of that was when I was building that business, I spent a lot of time in Silicon Valley, and the constant refrain was, when are you going to get serious about your company and move it to Silicon Valley? And my response was usually, dude, have you ever been to Santa Barbara? Like, we're not moving, right? But it's gotten a lot easier. I mean, when I started working at Computer Motion, it was kind of the mid 90s. It was a struggle because we didn't have all these businesses to point to. We have multiple unicorns now. We have businesses, that have gone public, a number of businesses. So I think for anyone to say, you guys are still in the junior leagues. I mean, we have, if you think of lynda.com, you think of Microsoft or, LinkedIn ended up buying them. We have Procore, which is filed to go public. We have AppFolio, which is a multi-billion-dollar public company. We have RightScale, which sold to a big company. We had Eucalyptus that sold to HP. We have Invoca, which I was on the board for years. It's going to have a great exit. So on and on and on, right? Impact Radius. I mean, Commission Junction started here. I mean, there's been a lot of success this year.
Entrepreneurs there.
I just recited like 15 to 17 years of history, right? So it took some time. We're on generation 3 of successful companies in town. So that makes it a lot easier. So now you've got people that, like when we sold our business to Citrix, 4 major companies came out of those core talented people that left. Logic Monitors, one I didn't mention, Logic Monitor was sold to private equity for $300+ million. That was the guy that ran our architecture. He founded
Wow.
that business.
So you guys had a little PayPal mafia coming out of
It's been called that, actually, the Expert City Mafia, because of the successes that have come out. The woman that was running my case, which recently had an exit, she was with us at Expert City. So anyway, to answer your question, it was difficult at the time. I think it's a lot easier now. We've gotten venture capital from all the major top firms at this point. So once they make one investment in a locale, it's a lot easier for them to make follow-on investments because they're already visiting, they're already going to be there.
Yeah. Now, what was it like for you moving from working in startups into actually investing, being an investor in venture capital?
So for me, I had a transitional period where I was an angel investor, right? So when you do a lot of startups and you're in that startup world like I was, if you're lucky, you have a lot of smart friends that start businesses. So I was a seed investor in Appfolio and RightScale and Eucalyptus and some of these other businesses that have gone on and done well. And I'd like to think it was because I was just so savvy, but it really was just because I had smart friends and they said, hey, if you want to put some money in, you can, you don't have to, that kind of thing. But I did enough of that. So I did about 3 or 4 years of that, had a little bit of success, kind of thought, maybe I can be an investor. I do have the teaching gene. My father was a teacher. He was a professor. So I knew that I liked to teach, and early stage venture, for anyone who's done it, it's really a lot of coaching and a lot of teaching. You have to enjoy working with curious, excited people. And if you don't, then you probably should do later stage or do something else. But so I felt like here I am, I'm leveraging my teaching, I'm doing writing. My investing seems to be going pretty well so far. So that's when I joined Rincon Ventures, which had already been formed, but it only had one fund. It had like a $27 million fund. So we went off and did 2 follow-on funds after that. Like, as you mentioned in my bio, we raised almost, all things considered, it was about 100 million, which we deployed mostly in SaaS. So mostly as software as a service, because that's the area of expertise I had.
And were they all companies out of Santa Barbara or out of the Central Coast area, or no?
Not really. We would have done quite well if we had just focused on Santa Barbara, but a lot of Santa Monica-based companies, some Bay Area companies as well. 1 or 2 on the East Coast, which proved problematic for a small firm because it's just, distance, if you're early, you should be close. Like, you really need to be able to get down or get up, whichever direction, to the company and be hands-on. I found that my ability to help folks from across the country, even with Zoom and GoToMeeting and everything else, it's just more limited than if you could just pop down to their office.
Right. And what was it like with a brand new VC fund, establishing yourself? People hadn't heard of you before. What was that like?
Well, this is going to be a shocker. It's a lot like a startup. You're going to get most of your money from friends and family, people that know you, right? So we passed a hat on Fund 1 just among people. We didn't even try to raise money from people that didn't know us because we knew that would have not worked.
Yeah.
Fund 2,
what about on the deal flow side, though?
Well, deal flow, I think, that's a good question as well. We never had a problem with deal flow. I think maybe because at that point I had a profile locally that was high. I don't know. I just was seeing a lot of deals. I was writing. I was an early blogger. So I don't know. I never had a problem with deal flow. But on the money raising side, the second fund, we thought that had to be friends and family as well. We ended up getting institutional money involved, which we were surprised by. And Fund 3 was the easiest fundraise ever because it's like, oh, you guys are raising it again? Sure, I'm in again. Just the amount of time. What year was it? It was crazy. Like, the amount of time to raise Fund 3 was like, a third of Fund 2, and Fund 2 was like, 10th of Fund 1. So
And what year what year were you raising round 3?
Oh, good question. So we were kind of 05, 07, 08, 10, 11, or maybe 11, 12.
Okay.
That sounds something like that.
Okay. Yep. Yeah. I was trying to figure out if it was something in the economy,
No.
A lot of times when people say like, oh, it's so easy to raise money, you're like, okay, that was 2000, right? Is what you're talking about.
No, I think it's because we had institutionals in our fund already, and they were like, yeah, sure. And our funds are small, for God's sake. I mean, we weren't trying to raise that much money.
Now, you have you've been teaching at UCSB, and there's this technology management program, which is an interesting name for a program that helps that's in the entrepreneurship space.
Yep.
I didn't study entrepreneurship when I was at UCSB, and they don't have a business degree. You can't get an MBA from the program. So talk a little bit about, were you there at the beginning, at the outset of the technology management program? Why is it called that also?
Yeah. Yeah. So I was there pretty close to the beginning. And we do, just to clarify, we do have a master's of technology management now. We're about our fourth year. I teach there as well. I'm advising a couple student groups right now. But yeah, so go back in time. This was probably like 05-ish. So the two guys that I had success with at the robotics company and at the company we sold to Citrix, they were both former professors that decided to go into business. And so the idea, and both had tremendous success. The idea was, what if Yulin and Klaus had been able to just have a basic class in options, VC, just real basic stuff? They certainly would have been able to get up to speed faster. So the first class was just entrepreneurship. It was only for engineers, and it was just to do that. It was just to teach the super basics of okay, you think you have an idea, here's how you can keep from getting ripped off. That became so popular, the dean decided to open it up to the broader audience of the university. Then it became 2 classes, then it became 4, 6, 8, 10. So now we have a certificate where you have to take a certain number of classes. It's open to every single major. We are the most popular program on campus. We accept every major. And I'm virtual this quarter, but my class is going to end up about 350 people. Wow. And I could take more. Like, the demand for the classes are tremendous. Like, people really want to understand, are they an entrepreneur? Like, what is entrepreneurship all about? They have a thirst for this knowledge.
So it says a lot about what's the most popular class and how things have changed. Because I think when I was there, I think it was the sex class, which
yes.
I don't know if they're still teaching that anymore, but.
No, I was running neck and neck. So I wanted to kind of see how big a class I could teach and have it still be effective. So I let it get up to about 750 students. And I found that, I was in the second biggest lecture hall on campus.
Campbell Hall?
It wasn't Campbell. It's Ivy Theater 1.
Okay. Yeah.
It's a huge room.
Yeah. That is a huge room.
I know what the max is, so I don't want to teach that again. Yeah. But I was vying for the sex ed, like, who could have the biggest class?
Yeah. I stopped taking classes of that size because I couldn't handle it. It was too big.
Well, I did the whole Phil Donahue thing from the 70s. Like, I would go up and down the aisles with a microphone, and I would pass the microphone and make people talk. And it was kind of fun from that standpoint. Like, those kids had never seen that. Like, their minds were like, I thought I was coming to this class to sleep, right? But 10 weeks of that, at the end of it, I was like, peace out. I can't do this anymore. So it was a fun experiment, but I wouldn't do it again.
So, I wasn't the kid who was out there selling popcorn on my parents' lawn. I came to entrepreneurship later. In fact, I studied English when I was in college. But when you have kids who enroll in your classes and they're asking themselves, am I an entrepreneur? What do you take them through? How do you help them figure that out?
Yeah, it's funny that you asked that, because a lot of people want to be anointed an entrepreneur, right? I'm friends with a couple, I won't name drop, I'm friends with some pretty high profile people, and they get, in the entrepreneur world, they get people coming to them almost saying, am I an entrepreneur? Can you bless me? Can I, and it's not that way. Like, what I think about your entrepreneurship or not is irrelevant, right? So I ask students to, rather than asking me what I think of their entrepreneur abilities, I just ask them to think back in over their lifetime. And, have they been attracted to ambiguity? Do they run from ambiguity? Because most kids, you can't say, well, what's your risk profile? Because they're going to go, what does that mean?
Yeah.
So I try to ask the questions kind of differently.
That's actually an interesting point. Do you find that people who are more open to risk are better entrepreneurs, or is it the opposite? Because it's kind of an interesting debate whether entrepreneurs are risk takers or not. I would argue that there are some entrepreneurs that are very much risk takers, and there are others that are risk avoiders. Yeah,
but see, so again, just because I teach at UCSB doesn't mean everything I say is based on science. It's not. What I'm about to say is not. But my belief is that entrepreneurs are not classic risk takers in the sense that I never saw the risk. If you had met me in 1994 and I was talking to you about the medical robotics company and how we were going to change the world and how it would be routine for you to walk into a hospital and get a robotic surgery, which you can do right down the street from where I'm sitting right now, I wouldn't have thought it was risky. You would have like laughed your ass off when I walked away, right? You would have been like, that guy's a nut. Like nobody's going to let a robot operate on them. But in my mind, it was just preordained. Like it made so much sense. Are you telling me you can make the surgeon's hand movements, you can scale them down to 1/100th of an inch and allow them to suture on parts of the body they can't do now? I was in like, okay, let's go. But it's because I had that just that personality trait where I was already sort of 3 or 4 years ahead of where I probably should have been. Like I should have woken up in a cold sweat every morning going, what are we trying to do? I mean, it's hard enough to start a company. It's really hard to start an industry. And that is what we tried, right? And we were successful. And we were successful in some part because of what Intuitive Surgical did as our competitor. So it was that classic, like we were missionary selling, and we actually were pretty psyched when they came on the scene, better funded, higher profile entrepreneurs, because they were breaking ground for us that was, would have been even harder for us to break on our own.
You mentioned you didn't want to drop any name drop, which I appreciate. That's totally fine. But I'm going to ask you a question that might require you to. So, are there any interesting entrepreneurs, successful entrepreneurs that you've maybe had the opportunity to observe up close, perhaps working with them in some capacity or another, who you would highlight as someone doing something interesting or really embodying what is a truly exceptional entrepreneur? Yeah.
So I'll focus on sort of just the pure entrepreneur. I'll focus on an entrepreneur that ended up becoming an investor. And so I think, and I also am self-aware enough to know that we're often attracted to people that are like us or that we perceive are like us or we want to be like. So about what I'm about to tell you is I put myself kind of in the same boat, which is probably why I admire these people somewhat. And what I'm alluding to is what happened in the kind of in the 2010s, right, the teens, where a lot of entrepreneurs became VC. They went from being an operator like I was to an investor like I did. So who do I like in that class? Well, I really like what Mark Suster has done at Upfront. And in fact, the very first investment he did was with Invoca, which I mentioned earlier. It was a local company where I knew the founders and I had real long history with Invoca. Mark made that investment, and I was able to sit on a board with him for 11 years, long haul, right? And he was an awesome, and I'm saying this, that I don't need or want anything from Mark. I know a lot of people do, right? Because he's a very influential person. He's a friend of mine. That's all it is. But I was able to see him work with the company. We had to swap out CEOs. It was just, it's never easy in over a decade. And that business is well suited to have an awesome exit. And I give Mark, as well as the CEO who's there now and been there for several years, Greg. But I give Mark a lot of credit for that. That deal could have gone a lot of different directions. And Mark, as a appropriately hands-on investor, came in and helped fix things. So, others that are in that, like Brad Feld is another person I consider a friend. I've never worked with him as I have with Mark, but I think Brad has that similar sentiment, right? He really he doesn't want to run the ship, but he can lean upon his operating skills to help advise the executive team in the appropriate way.
Anyone else you care to highlight?
Well, I mean, gosh, I don't want to, if I start making a list, I'm going to leave people out and they're going to go, I saw your podcast. So I'll stop there. Those are two very well-known investors that I admire. There are others, but.
Yeah. Talk about some of the companies that you've had the benefit of witnessing or been involved with that have come out of Santa Barbara over the last 10, 15 years, 20 years that you've been observing it, because you've had unicorns, a lot of amazing, interesting companies, including a few that have come out of your classes. So talk a little bit about those. Yeah.
And the fact that the founders took a class from me is irrelevant to their success. I don't want to try to tie those two together by any means, but I'm very proud of them. One of them is James Rogers, who started Appeal. He was a PhD student at the time, and he launched or he pitched in my class, which the objective of the class was you had to pitch an idea and then form a group around it and then spend 10 weeks vetting that idea. And then if your idea was good enough, you could then roll into our new venture competition, which has been going on now for about 27, 28 years. James is an exceptional human being. He's now just done incredibly well. Appeal is a unicorn. Their last valuation was well over $1 billion. I think they're going to change the world. Another one that I'm quite proud to have just been I wouldn't even say I've been a small part of it, just to watch it grow is called Next Energy Technologies. Corey was the PhD founder who figured out a way through material sciences to turn clear windows, so not like a window where you can't see through it, but regular windows, turn those into solar panels. That is now commercial technology. So it took 7 or 8 years, but it's commercial. There's a big plant in the middle of the United States whose name I cannot say, but they are going to start pumping out that glass. And I'm now an advisor to the company and have been for a couple of years. We're going to be launching in Europe, we hope, by the end of this year, if not early next year. So that's another fun one. Inogen is one a lot of people know. That is a oxygen concentrator company that's a multi-billion-dollar public company. The 3 founders all came out of our new venture competition, and they've changed just tens of thousands of lives. My wife's father, who recently got ill, used an Inogen unit. My father-in-law, on my sister's side, another relative used it. I'm really love to sing the praises of businesses that change the world in a positive way, right? Not just make a lot of money, but actually have an impact. And Next, in Appeal, and in Inogen, all 3 have done that.
Give me some examples of companies that have come to you with an idea that's not quite shaped yet, not quite ready yet. Maybe they need to go back to the drawing board. How do you approach that? That's such a difficult, sensitive topic, and not easy to advise, especially when there could be a kernel of an idea there, or it could be just, sorry guys, you got to come up with something else. How do you approach that conversation?
Yeah. So it's similar to when somebody asks me, am I an entrepreneur? People come to me and say, do you like my idea? What do you think of my idea? And it's like, it doesn't matter what I think of your idea. What do you think of it? So I'll spend a lot of time talking, and these are young people. I wouldn't say that to a 45-year-old, but these are young people that are still figuring things out. And where we usually go with it, and what I impart on them, or what I try to impart on them, is the reason I'm not being flippant when I say it doesn't matter what I think of your idea. The reality is it doesn't matter what I think of your idea. What I want you to do is go into the marketplace with your idea, talk to people in that industry, talk to potential customers, all the basic MVP 101 type stuff that everybody who's not 22 knows. And then you'll change your idea and you'll morph and evolve your idea to fit the market if you have what it takes as an entrepreneur. I don't say that last part, but if they're truly an entrepreneur and they want it bad enough, they'll probably figure it out. So if I see an idea that unless it's just horrendous, there have been a few times where I've just said, you really might want it. That's a crowded space. You're going to need $100 million. I don't say that. I don't tell every person with every idea that they should just try to launch. But if it's one that is doable for a young person, I don't want to discourage them in any way. I don't want to be the person that sort of took the air out of somebody's balloon when that wasn't appropriate.
Right. And sometimes they'll come to the conclusion themselves, right?
Well, yes, and you've seen it, with Lyft that came out of UCSB, of which I didn't have anything to do with that business, but that didn't start out to where it ended up. Uber was basically a black car service. It was like a good cab service. Mm-hmm. So we know over and over how businesses that started one way. Pinterest started, something completely different. Right? Snapchat was basically a filter for software. We know that many very, very, very successful companies started out doing something either slightly different or entirely different, but very few times was it exactly what they ended up doing.
So many of these folks that come through your programs they have an engineering background, or they're scientists of some sort. They come from the sciences. What sorts of challenges do they have stepping into the role of entrepreneurship when they come from that specific training and background?
It's going to sound like I'm stereotyping, but oftentimes, if you're asking me to generalize, so if I'm going to generalize, I think oftentimes someone that is attracted to an engineering degree isn't always as comfortable selling their idea or trying to raise money or even recruiting other people to their team. So, that's not a big deal. Like, that's just the way life is, right? I have certain strengths and I have a lot of weaknesses. I think it's knowing those two things as a young person is highly important. So what I spend a lot of time with the engineering folks is trying to help them find that person to partner with, like find that gregarious, non-technical, maybe a little bit more exuberant person that you can partner with, and they can go out and recruit people, they can raise money, they can market your idea or whatever. The ones that really struggle are the ones that aren't open to that personality type. You do see some, and it's a pretty small percentage, but you do see some engineering types that almost feel like that's a flim-flam man, or that's a used car salesperson. And I do my best to try to explain, no, that's in the movies. In real life, you can be totally ethical and still be excited about your product. But I do think that's a challenge for some engineering inventor types.
Yeah. There's so many different technology areas that are booming right now. As we get close to wrapping up this conversation, are there any particular areas that get you excited? I know you were involved in SaaS for many years, and you've moved into some other areas, but what are you excited about?
Well, I'm not going to surprise anybody that's listening. I'm not going to say big data, but I just said it. No, I think I really like non-game, kind of maybe non-consumer applications of VR and AR. So sort of the boring stuff that you heard a lot about a few years ago, and then it seems it kind of got overtaken by Oculus and some of the other cool stuff. But we all kind of know like how that technology tends to evolve. Games are usually very early adopters. I think it's going to become commonplace. I think we're going to call it something different. We're not going to call it VR or AR. It'll just be so ubiquitous that it'll just be part of our daily life. But I think that's going to be happening. There's some sort of an overlay in some modality that if I was smart enough, I would start a company right now and create it. But somebody will figure that out. And it's simply, we have movies from 25, 30 years ago that did this. It'll just be a way to bring all of the power of the internet and all that data right into our daily active lives, not in screen format, but just more and just all the world around us. So I like what we did an invest with in Entrada Ventures, where I'm an advisory partner in applied VR, which is using VR for therapeutics. So I think in the medical world, there's going to be a whole industry of applications where, what if a doctor wants to, using artificial intelligence, of course, and big data, what if they want to, match up a scan or something that they're looking at, like, is this a tumor? Like, I'm not sure. We know that AI has a better track record of identifying what is and what isn't a tumor. So you can imagine using the power of AI in a visual form, maybe overlaying with a tumor or showing some probability, or I don't know. I just think that's going to be part of our lives. Mm-hmm. And what'll be funny is movies, 10, 15 years from now, somebody will watch a movie and somebody will be holding a smartphone or somebody will be looking at a laptop like I am now. And they're literally going to go, what is that? Like my kids would do with a payphone, right?
Yeah. It'll be funny. Yeah. Well, this has been great, John. Appreciate you taking the time. I want to wrap up with two questions I always ask, one of which you've kind of already answered. But the first one is, I'm a big fan of gratitude. So as you look around at your peers, your contemporaries, which you can define however you like, who do you respect? Who do you admire is out there doing interesting things?
I kind of want to say Mark Suster again, because he's still out there doing really interesting things. He's really made himself available to so many people. I don't know how he gets through his days. He's so busy, but he's transformed the SoCal venture community. Like it was a wasteland when he came to GRP years ago. And so I'll just stick with him for now for that. I'll use him for two answers. What was your other question? Sorry.
Then the second one was, let's pretend we're at an awards banquet, much like the Oscars or the Emmys. You're receiving a award for lifetime achievement for everything you've done up until this point. Wow. And many of us mention our family and friends, and that's totally fine. But beyond that, who are the business partners? Who are the mentors? Who are the coaches? Who are the teachers? Who are the people that you would acknowledge from any stage in your career? It could be from childhood, could be from high school, could be from MBA, whenever.
Yeah, that's a big. It must not be a very prestigious awards event, but getting that award. As you said, there's a lot of people that qualify for that list. The one person I would highlight is somebody very early in my career that I really feel like I've had two like full-on long-term mentors, and he's one of them. It was a small software company. I got to do, I was still pretty young. I got to do everything from support to writing the manuals to helping with run the customer support desk, everything, right? Except for coding. And probably the most important thing was sales. Got to the year 3 with him, and he literally said, John, I love working with you. And, we had a very close relationship, but he's basically pushed me out of the nest in the sense of, this is never going to be a big company. And I'm not going to name the company. They're still around today, like literally all these years later. And it's not a big company even today. So he said, there's bigger things waiting for you out there. It was almost like being 18 years old and getting kicked out of the house by your parents or something. It was a little bit, I wouldn't say it was off-putting. It was very emotional for me. But that just opened me up to coming to California and doing some of the things that I've been lucky to do with some really smart people. So I have to give him, because I think it would have been easy in retrospect, now that I'm about the age he was at the time he said this to me. If you have a young, aggressive, a young person at your business, who could take it over at some point, I think it'd be hard to say to that person, I think you should move on, right?
Yeah, because I'm sure they were dependent on you.
Not for my benefit.
Yeah, so I'm sure he was dependent on you for a lot of things. So, yeah. Well, and then was there a second?
I don't want to overpaint how important I was, but certainly you could see a more selfish person would have said, "Hey, I want this young person to stay and keep working hard." So
sure, for sure. And then was there a second person that you said?
He's actually still my mentor. So here's what I tell students. They'll say, what do I do to find a mentor? How should I look at the world? And this is answering your question about the other person. I say, find someone who's maybe, 3, 5, 7 years ahead of where you want to be. So they're walking a path that you want to walk down one day. And so you just want to find out, what's it like walking down that path? Well, you could see, if people that aren't watching this, my gray hair, right? I'm in my later 50s. So I connected with somebody who's about 14 years older than me, who was at that time just starting to retire. And watching the way he was tackling the world as a newly retired person, sort of the hobbies he took up, and he sort of took me under his wing. And, we're best friends. It's kind of weird having a best friend in your late 50s, but we do a lot of stuff together. And I've just learned a lot from him. And what's interesting hopefully it's interesting to people listening, he was not a business person. So oftentimes you think a mentor has to be someone that can help you, right? It has to be somebody that can help you in your career. This individual has helped me in so many ways personally, but he was not a career mentor. He didn't know anything about business, really. And I think that's part of why we got along so well. Is he was bringing to me insights and things that I couldn't have gotten from a business mentor.
Very good. John, it's been great talking to you. Where can people go to learn more about you and follow along?
Yeah, I'm mostly writing on Forbes now. I think the whole Medium thing has collapsed, and I had my own blog for, I don't know, 12 or 14 years. But most of my new stuff, I wrote a new article today. Most of my stuff is coming out of Forbes, and I tend to focus on traditionally underrepresented entrepreneurs. So if there's anybody out there that has a cool business that they got going and they want to get some a little bit of exposure that might be hard for them to get, maybe they're younger or they're just coming from non-VC backed background, a minority, a woman, and anyone who feels like they want their voice heard. If I can amplify it, I'm happy to try.
That's great. 211 years later, the first woman to earn a patent continues to shape Easter celebrations. That's the title of the most recent one, it looks like.
Is that a clickbait title or what?
Well done.
But like this month, I write about women a lot, but this month I wrote about a lot of women from the 1800s that did such crazy inventive stuff in an era when they couldn't even own their own property. So
yeah, that's cool. That's fun to unearth those stories. John, it was a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Right on. Thanks, John.
Thank you for listening to the Smart Business Revolution podcast with John Corcoran. Find out more at smartbusinessrevolution.com. And while you're there, sign up for our email list and join the revolution. Revolution. And be listening for the next episode of the Smart Business Revolution podcast.